us from a different time zone. Today we have a special guest and also an interesting topic. I know a lot of people sometimes when they see topics that are not exactly Power BI, they begin to think about it. Should I join early? Should I go watch the recording? Should I register for it? I'm glad you joined, but I'm going to also tell you that it's a strategic benefit you gain by always being aware of all the things that are also cloud related, because computing, analytics, and all are beginning to shift to the cloud platform. And we all are aware that when it comes to Microsoft, all the cloud tools are now currently housed in a Microsoft Azure as the family tool. And so I always tell people that whatever you learn in Azure applies to every area of your technology space. You should always take the opportunity to learn how to do something new in Azure, or what you used to do in a different platform. And our speaker today is as good as we can get. You know, we're getting someone directly from Microsoft. His name is Ahmad Yaseen, and he's going to be with us for like an hour. So I'm going to get out of the way soon. And this session is brought to you by your BizEdge and MHS Analytics, and we are just a consulting and training company. Your BizEdge is a consulting and training company in Nigeria. If you need training from people who are also consult, so it's not just people who are reading from textbooks or just attend training and start training other people. We actually consult and do projects for companies, so you get a mix of the two good worlds, you know, on hands-on experience plus training expertise. Then for MHS Analytics, it's actually our Canadian entity. So if you have friends or colleagues, or even you yourself are probably in Canada and you want to, you know, engage us on training or consulting, it might be easier to go through the MHS Analytics, you know, the Canadian entity. All right, and our speaker today is Ahmad Yaseen. I'm going to share his LinkedIn Connect URL, his LinkedIn link. He's a Microsoft Big Data engineer with deep knowledge and experience in SQL, in BI, SQL, server database administration, and different development fields. He's a Microsoft certified solution expert and also a Microsoft certified solutions associate in SQL database administration. He's an Azure developer. He's got actually works with Microsoft, so essentially he's got more a bigger credential than even the certifications I'm reading up. For my colleague, this is what he has prepared, so that's why I still have to read it. Okay, so right now I'm going to hand over to him, but I will just let you know that if you have questions, because he has prepared a lot for us, so if you have questions, please put your questions in the chat box, you know, at maybe the end, or whenever if he wants to, he will notify me, then, you know, he will answer your questions. And at the end, you know, we also have our own questions that, you know, allow you to learn about different experts we bring in, you know, how their journey has been. So right now I'm going to hand over to Ahmad, and I'll let him, you know, do his magic, and we get to learn a lot from him today. So Ahmad, please, over to you. I'll fade into the background. I'll stop sharing my screen and turn off my video. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing me. And hi, everyone, and welcome to the Migrating Relational Data Workload to Microsoft Azure webinar. So let me start by sharing my screen so that we can start our discussion here. So I think we can skip the introduction because Michelle already performed a good introduction about myself. And yeah, I'm happy to be part of this webinar today. Okay, so let's start our discussion today about migrating our workloads to Microsoft Azure. First of all, let us start with the first step in the data migration process. So, data, we know every one of us is working with data. So we know that data is one of the most precious assets in each company that drive business success. And as a proactive data engineer, database administrator, whatever you have a role in the data field, in an international company or big company, you will always think how to secure your data. at rest or at a transit while it's moving from the application to the database. And we need to use the most optimal data platform technologies to serve the data to our application clients from any point in the earth as fast as possible with the minimum downtime or loss possibilities for your data. With the growth of the company business, it's your responsibility to keep track of the data storage and retrieval speed in order not to lose your clients. Put yourself in the shoes of client who is trying to submit an online order to buy from an online store, but the site is taking long time to refresh the content and submit the order. Like what we can see here, it's loading for a long time. So any one of us who is seeing this loading for a long time, for me, I will close the site and buy it from the nearest store that I have. Another thing that can encourage us to migrate is that if the infrastructure administrator starts complaining about the limitation on the remaining resources in the current hosting machine or the delay in receiving new purchased resources, it's a suitable time to discuss with the management the choice to move your workload to Microsoft Azure. This is the first thing is that is indicating why we need to migrate to the cloud. Now, before migrating to cloud, we need to have an initial study because before you think to send a meeting request to your management team to discuss your idea about migrating the current SQL workload to Microsoft Azure, we need to take into consideration that it's not the only word that you need to mention to the management team or step by step tutorial that you need to follow in order to migrate to Azure. You should be prepared and ready for any question by preparing comprehensive study that includes the current site problems and limitations, a plan for the design and implementation phases of the migration process, and the benefits that the company will gain from moving the workload to Azure. Mainly, the initial study for the migrating process should include many points, but it's not limited to these points that I will discuss. First of all, the current SQL and NoSQL workload types in your company, such as if you have OLTP workload or lab workloads, and the database administration and monitoring tool that you are using on the on-premises side. You need to identify also the list of on-premises database engine types, versions, and locations. The current database resources size, you need to study it and make an inventory. And you need to have an expected resource growth ratio for your database. You need to identify the dependencies between the databases. This will help in selecting a list of candidate databases that can participate in the first wave of migration so that you can test your migration in a first wave. And you need to see which databases that are located or hosted in my on-premises environment that I can easily consolidate together in a single database or a single host in Azure. And we need to understand the dependencies between the databases and applications. So maybe we have one application that's connected to multiple databases. In this way, I can host these databases together in one server or in one service so that the application can connect directly to these databases. We need to understand also the security and encryption requirements for each database. And this can be done after a long discussion with our security team in the company. Also, we need to understand what is the current backup strategy that we have and what's the tool that we are using to perform our backup. We need also to have a list of whatever components we are using in our data models. For example, if you have a SQL Server integration service, an ETL tool, if you have a SQL Server analysis service, SQL Server reporting service, you need to understand whatever services you are using in data architecture in order to see what are the alternatives to use in Azure. You need also to specify the list of issues that you are facing currently, such as if you have a performance issue, availability issue, resources issue, and what are the limitations that you have in your current site. For example, do you have a hardware issue? You are not able to upgrade your hardware. You have multiple unsupported features in your environment. All these can let you know if it's the proper time to migrate to Microsoft Azure. You need to understand what are the availability requirements for your database. You need to understand what is the recovery time objectives, we call it RTO, and what is the recovery point objective, the RPO, for your database, in order to understand how you can achieve these things in Microsoft Azure. Okay, so once we have an initial study for the current environment, we can go now to the next step, which is understanding what are the cloud considerations. So we understand the current situation. We should have a look at the cloud solutions that can be used to replace the current on-premises site. This includes learning the features available in each service and the pros and cons of each service that we have in order to identify which service meets our requirements. Once we have reviewing the Microsoft Azure database related services, we need to take into consideration multiple points here. For example, we need to choose the suitable target data platform in the cloud. We know that, or we will discuss also later in this webinar, that Microsoft Azure provides us services in two categories. The first one, which is infrastructure as a service, we call it IaaS, and platform as a service, which is PaaS. And the decision here is based on the technical requirements and the cost plan that our management team provide us. This choice can specify what Azure service can be used and the control level of each service that we have. Also, the Microsoft Azure services that can be used as replacements of every single feature or component or functionality in the data architecture that we have. Also, we need to understand the proper size of the Microsoft Azure services that fit our current site growth ratio. And we need to understand, are we able to scale up or scale down easily, or scale in and scale out, just to identify the differences? Scale up and down for the current resources. For example, if we have one server, we scale up by increasing the server resources. We scale out by adding more servers to serve the same goal here. We need to understand also and specify what is the suitable region to host our database to provide us with the lowest possible latency. Because this depends highly on the location of our clients. If our clients, for example, in India, we need to have our data service to be created in one of the regions in India. Also, we need to understand the cloud service configuration and features that can help us to achieve the RTO and RPO that we already specified in the initial study. Also, we need to discuss with the security team, does Azure have the ability to achieve the security and compliance requirements of our company? Also, what changes should I perform to the current workload before migrating it to Microsoft Azure? Because you know that if I go to the management or development team and I will tell them we need to perform all these changes before migrating to Azure, the first thing that they will say, okay, we need to stay here on a premises without moving to Azure, because we don't have time and efforts or resources to perform all these changes. This is why we need to understand what is the current situation that we have and what is the best cloud service that can help us to achieve our goals. We need to understand also what are the administration and monitoring tools that we can use to replace our on-premises tools, and what is the ability to perform the encryption and security requirements here. Can we perform a backup and recovery or backup strategy that we already have in Azure and perform it automatically? Is there any potential blockers for us here? What are the tools that we can use to perform the migration? We need to perform a validation test before migrating all our production databases. What are the breaking fixes that we should consider before migrating to Azure? Once you understand all these things, in addition to the rollback plan in case of any failure, we can go to the management team and book with them a meeting to discuss all these things. Okay, now we got an understanding about what are the initial study steps that we need to perform, and we understand what are the capabilities that are provided in Azure. Once we have these studies, we can start digging deeper to understand which service can help us here. Okay, before choosing our suitable Microsoft Azure database service that will meet our requirements, we need to specify what is the best platform for us. Because Microsoft Azure, as we discussed, provides two high-level platform options. We have infrastructure as a service. It's also known as IaaS. We have platform as a service, which is also known as PaaS. The platform choice can help us to specify which data platform service that can fit our requirements. Let's dig deeper to understand more about the IaaS and PaaS. So, choosing the IaaS platform, it's similar as renting an IT infrastructure server or a virtual machine from the cloud provider. This includes, for example, the storage, the network, the operating system. With this platform, you are still responsible for, and also you have a control over your operating system. So starting from here, as you can see, you will have with IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, you are responsible for your virtual machine and installing the operating system and whatever services that will be hosted in this virtual machine. So if you need to apply security updates for your operating system, if you install your SQL Server, and also you'll be responsible for batching your SQL Server. In other words, here you can imagine that whatever installation or operating system batches that will be here in your virtual machine, you will be responsible for it. So when you go from IaaS or infrastructure as a service to platform as a service, you are leaving or delivering more requirements or more tasks to the provider or to the cloud provider. For example, in the past or platform as a service, it provides us with the ability to build and test and deploy your application without worrying about the underlying infrastructure management. For example, you are not responsible for the operating system. You are not responsible for batching your machine or the services that are installed in your machine. You can see here in this image that your responsibilities are in green here, and the list of layers that you don't need to worry about is in blue, which is for the cloud provider. For example, Microsoft for Microsoft Azure and Amazon for AWS. They will be responsible for these layers. You are responsible for everything when you are hosting your database in your data center. As you can see here, if it's in your own premises, you are responsible for everything. So your team should handle all these tasks. In the IaaS platform, you can rent a virtual machine and install your SQL Server on it, where you will be responsible for the operating system, the SQL Server installation, the administration tasks under that service. If you move to PaaS, you can see that Microsoft Azure will provide you with different choices. For example, you can use Azure SQL DB or Azure SQL Managed Instance for your transactional workload. You can use Azure Cosmos DB for your non-SQL or non-transactional, no-SQL workload. If you have an analytical workload, you can use Azure Synapse Analytics. Now let's discuss these services that we have in Microsoft Azure. For example, we have SQL Server on Azure VM, and this one will provide us with the ability to install SQL Server instance in a managed virtual machine. When I say managed virtual machine, the virtual machine itself will be managed, but the SQL Server and the operating system will be managed by you. This option is a good or the best choice for you if you plan to perform lift and shift from your on-premise environment. to Microsoft Azure, because here you will perform the minimal possible changes to your application and databases. You will have a full control over your SQL Server database and your operating system. This includes the security configurations, the users, whatever services or other components that you need to install with the SQL Server instance. All these will be your responsibilities. SQL Server on Azure VM, it will be suitable for your company if you already have an IT team, because this team will be responsible for administrating and handling the virtual machine itself from the operating system, networking, security perspective, and a database administrator who will be responsible for handling the part of SQL Server administration. But if you don't want to wait for purchasing new hardware, new or upgrade your server, for example, to add more resources, instead of upgrading your on-premise environment, you can go and you can rent a virtual machine from Azure, and you can install SQL Server on it, scale it up, scale it down based on your requirements. If you go to platform as a service, the first service in Azure that you can host your database on it, it's called Azure SQL Database. Azure SQL Database, it's a PaaS service, platform as a service, and it's a cloud computing database service. It provides us with the ability to host your SQL database in the cloud without worrying about the hardware, the software requirements, whatever you have will be responsible for Microsoft or handled by Microsoft. Although you are not responsible for the hardware security or the operating system, the database files, the encryption that is used, you will be responsible for preventing unauthorized users from accessing your database. You can handle this by specifying which user can access your database, what privileges each user have, and you need to specify by configuring the firewall the IP addresses or the virtual network VNets that are allowed to access your database. So always we say that the security, it's a shared responsibility between you and the provider. Okay, why I need to think about Azure SQL Database? Azure SQL Database, it provides us with many features, including the ability to automate the backup operation, keep your backup up to 10 years, create readable secondary replica to distribute the reporting workload. For example, if you have a Power BI server, you can direct it, this one to the read-only replica instead of having all the workload on the primary server. You can also perform performance tuning to your queries automatically. You can have point-in-time restore to your database whenever you have a corruption, whenever you have data issue, you can restore it directly. You have a built-in high availability and disaster recovery solution in Azure SQL Database. You have the ability to scale up and down easily based on your workload by changing the database throughput unit, or we call it DTU value, without having any downtime for sure. Only when you create your Azure SQL Database, you need to provide a name, some configurations for your database, and directly you will have your database created directly. And the nice thing with Azure SQL DB is that you can deploy it as a single database by specifying DTU or database throughput unit or vCore model. It's a purchasing model in which you can specify, for example, if you know exactly what are the memory and CPU resources required for your database, you can choose the vCore model. If you have multiple databases and these databases have an unpredictable workload, for example, sometimes it's go up, sometimes down, and you need to take advantage of the resources that you are renting, you can have your databases hosted in an elastic pool. So it's a pool of resources in which you have multiple databases sharing the same resources. The second type of services that are provided as PaaS or platform as a service in Azure, we call it Azure SQL Managed Instance. The Azure SQL Managed Instance is the best choice for you if you plan to migrate your SQL workload to Microsoft Azure PaaS with a minimal possible database changes. Why? Because it provides all the benefits available in Azure SQL Database with all other features provided by the SQL Server or normal SQL Server that's hosted in Azure VM. Because, for example, SQL Agent, cross database query, SSIS, SSRS, SSAS, all these are not supported in Azure SQL DB. But with Azure SQL Managed Instance, you can have Azure SQL or sorry SQL Agent jobs to automate and schedule your task. You can have also the MS DTC, which is the service responsible for the distributed transactions. You can have the business intelligence services such as data quality service or a master data service. You can configure database mail also within Azure SQL Managed Instance. So Azure SQL Managed Instance by itself, it fits the application with the surface area scope at the instance level, not like a database level, which is Azure SQL DB. It provides you with an isolated environment, and you can configure backup retention and recovery period because the backup is automated in Azure. You can have also an advanced workload analysis. You can also automate your backup and your database tuning, your maintenance. You can configure also the encryption at the database level. All these are available easily in an Azure SQL Managed Instance. We have also another service which is called also Azure Synapse Analytics. It's a PaaS service. This one or this service can allow you to migrate our analytical workload to Microsoft Azure. It's a comprehensive solution. It's not only a SQL data warehouse. Previously, we call it Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now it become a complete solution. We call it Azure Synapse Analytics solution. Azure Synapse Analytics, it's a comprehensive analytical solution with data warehouse as a storage. Big data analytics using Spark. Data integration using Azure Data Factory. It has also visualization capabilities using Power BI. So you can imagine Azure Synapse Analytics as a SQL Server database for data warehousing. It's an Azure or it's an Apache Spark for big data analytics. It's an Azure Data Factory for ETL processes, extract, transform, and load. It has a Power BI for visualization. It has Azure Data Explorer for log and time series analytics. All these will be in the same or in one solution. Azure Synapse SQL, for example, component. This component can provide us with serverless resource model if you have an unplanned workload or unpredictable workload, or if you know what resources can fit your workload, you can have dedicated server or resources. Apache Spark for Synapse, this one is using for analysis. You can analyze the data that are stored in your data warehouse. You can also analyze the data without storing it at your site. Just you can have a link, we call it Synapse link, and you can connect to a data lake or Cosmos DB and analyze the data while it's located there. And no need to use an external ETL tool. Within the same tool, which is Azure Synapse Analytics, you can have pipelines, similar to the pipelines that are available in Azure Data Factory. Also, you can use the Data Explorer, as we discussed, for logs and telemetry data analysis. Okay, now we understand what are the provided services in Microsoft Azure that we can host our databases on it. Let's understand what are the guidance, assessment, and migration tools that we can use to migrate our databases or our data workload to Microsoft Azure. Okay, let's start with the first tool. We call it Azure Database Migration Guidance. So when we start drawing our plan to migrate the workload to Microsoft Azure, Azure Database Migration Guide is the first target that we need to use. Why? Because it's a comprehensive guidance for you that you can use to guide you what are the steps that you should follow and what are the tools that you should use in order to migrate your database to Microsoft Azure. Let me show you how we can use this tool mainly. So if you check this link, okay, so if you go to learn.microsoft.com data migration or search for Azure data migration, Azure database migration guidance, here you can imagine like we have a comprehensive tutorial that can help us to migrate from any data type to any other data type. For example, if you need to migrate your workload from SQL Server to SQL Server by upgrading from one version to another version, or migrate from Oracle to Microsoft on-premise or Azure, or from DB2, from IBM, from Access, from MySQL, from SAP, from NoSQL, from open source such as PostgreSQL or MySQL, you have all the guidances to perform this. For example, assume that I need to migrate workload from my on-premises SQL Server to an Azure SQL database. So just click here. It will provide you with a comprehensive documentation from Microsoft that you can follow and see what are the considerations that you need to see, how to choose the appropriate target for you, how to choose the purchasing model for you, service tier that fits my workload. If I can use, for example, SQL Server VM instead of Azure SQL Database, what are the migration tools that I can use with the documentation about each tool? So I can use assessment tool, I can use migration tool. What are the considerations? How should I compare the migration options? Should I use this one or this one? So it's a comprehensive documentation that can help you to identify which tool can fit my requirements. The second tool that we can use, it's called Microsoft Data Migration Assistant, or we call it DMA. The Data Migration Assistant, it's a tool that we can use to check the compatibility issues that may affect the database functionality when we migrate our database from one version to another version or from one platform to another platform. For example, I have a SQL Server database with version 2014. I need to migrate to SQL Server 2022. I will run the DMA tool in my and connect to my current on-premises database with version 2014. It will perform a comprehensive assessment for the current database and objects. It will provide me with a step with the blockers that I need to fix before migrating to the new or upgrading to the new version. For example, if I have any of the deprecated statements, deprecated features that I already use in the SQL Server 2014, this DMA tool will provide me with a guidance that before migrating to or upgrading to the new version, you need to fix these issues. For example, if I'm using text data type, we know that text data type is a deprecated data type that we need to change to varchar max. In this way, we can take advantage of this tool with all these recommendations. Also, if I need to go, for example, from my on-premises database to Azure SQL DB or Azure SQL Managed Instance, I can run the tool and it can provide me with all these guidances. Let me show you how I can do it. For example, we have this tool. You can download it from the internet, Microsoft Download Center. It's called Data Migration Assistant. So we need to create a new project. You can have a project for assessment to check the current workload. You can have a project to perform migration. So you can use the tool to check first. After that, you can use the same tool to perform the migration for you. It will migrate the databases, the logins, whatever components that you have. So for example, I need to perform a test migration so that it will check my current environment and see if I can migrate it. For example, I have source server is on-premise SQL Server. Destination, I need to migrate for, these are the options that you can see. If I migrate from SQL Server to SQL Server, this means upgrade. If I'm migrating from SQL Server to, for example, Azure SQL Managed Instance, I can see what are the things that I need to check. Here it will check both the database compatibility and what features are recommended for me to be used in Microsoft Azure. So connect to my database. Let's, for example, connect to the local database to check if I'm able to connect. Nice. I'm able to connect. Well, now we need to choose which database we need to perform the check for it. For example, let me check database with name Don't Sleep so that you will be wake up with me and click add. Now we will start our assessment. So it will perform a comprehensive check for the current objectives and it will provide me with whatever features or blockers for me that I need to perform before migrating. You can see that, okay, you are able to migrate. You don't have any problem. Go ahead. And you can see here an option that upgrade to Azure, upload to Azure Migrate, which means that you can use Azure Migrate tool directly to perform the migration without any problem. And here you can see, because this is a simple database. If you have another database, for example, um, let me create another assessment, for example, test 2, and click create, and the same server connect, and I need to check this database. This database, it contains a lot of objects. Let's start assessment. May take some time to perform the check. Okay, so because it's SQL Server, okay, compatibility issues, yes, here. So compatibility issues, we don't have any compatibility issues. So we are lucky that we can directly migrate this database to Azure SQL Managed Instance. Why? Because Azure SQL Managed Instance, it's compatible with the SQL, with the on-premise SQL Server. Let's have some blockers. I'm an optimistic person, but let's have something that can block us, just to see that we can see some blockers. Okay, create, next, and connect. And let's see this one to see if we can migrate it to Azure SQL Database. Just for your information, Azure SQL Database, it's a different engine. This is why when we migrate from Azure SQL Database to Azure, for example, from on-premise to Azure SQL Database, we may have multiple issues. For example, simply it's showing to you, okay, there are some unsupported features. So on-premise, you have SQL Server agent, and this one's not available in Azure SQL Database. So in order to perform the migration, you need to use another a replacement for this one. For example, you can use Azure, for example, automation service. You can have other tools that can replace for this one. For example, here there is something called Elastic Database Job that you can use instead of the Azure SQL, the SQL Server agent jobs. So here, the nice thing is that it will provide you the problem. It will provide you also with recommendations that you can follow in order to overcome this issue that you already have. We have also other type of services that can help us in the migration. For example, we can have Azure database migration service. It's a service inside Azure itself. So you can open Azure portal, and inside it you can use something we call it Azure database migration service. Within this service, or you need to create this service, and you can use this service easily to migrate your SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, DB2, MongoDB, PostgreSQL, whatever database you have your on-premise environment, you can migrate it to Microsoft Azure after fixing for sure any blocker you will have. So you can create this service in Azure within a few minutes. After that, you can start creating a new migration project. Within this project, you can start your migration process. Okay. So as you can see in the documentation that we already see or discussed, we need to understand, for example, I have a database server on a premise. Why should I go to Azure VM? We know that the cost of hosting SQL Server instance in Azure VM, it's higher than using PaaS or platform as a service services, but we still have a control over the compute and storage. Some companies will say, no, I will not go and migrate my database to PaaS service. I have a DBA team, so I should have full control. So it will provide, when you host your database in Azure VM, you can provide or you can gain a full administrative control over your operating system, SQL database. You have the ability to customize your high availability, disaster recovery, backup plan. Also, it will support all the on-premise services. For example, you can have transactional replication, integration service, analysis service, reporting service, whatever service or feature you have on your on-premises, you already have it in Azure VM. Also, you can perform the migration like a shift and left or lift and shift without performing a lot of changes. So if you have SQL Server 2005 version or later, you can easily migrate it to SQL Server on Azure VM. And you can have multiple databases hosted in the same instance, and you can perform cross-database transactions. Okay, I need to migrate to Azure VM. How can I do it? You need to have a plan. First of all, you need to understand and discover using the tools that we discussed. For example, you can try using the DMA tool, data migration assistant, and it can provide you with a, a list of blockers that you need to fix before migrating or starting the migration process. Once we perform the assessment, we need to understand which licenses we need. For example, if I already have a license in my on-premise environment for Windows Server and I have a license for my SQL Server, why should I go to Azure? I will pay more. Microsoft Azure tell you no need for this. If you have a license for your on-premises, you can easily use the same license using a program. It's called Bring Your Own License or BYOL. This model can reduce the cost by allowing you to take your license for Windows Server or for SQL Server and use it in Microsoft Azure. Okay, once you have fixing the licenses issue, the blockers for you, you need to understand which Azure virtual machine can fit my requirements. So I have a workload, and I will consider that my workload is growing. So I need to understand what is the minimum size for my virtual machine that I should use. Okay, after having all these things unblocked, I need to understand which migration method I should use. For example, I can easily take a backup of my database and copy the backup from my on-premise to the Azure VM, or I can, for example, take a backup for the database and host it in URL. URL means in an Azure storage account, blob storage, and I can perform the restore from there. But this time it's an offline migration. There is a downtime. Also, if I detach my database from on-premise and copy the files to my virtual machine in Azure and attach it there, I can perform this action, but it's an offline migration. If I already have an on-premise virtual machine, I can, for example, take the whole virtual machine and make a Hyper-V VHD. It's like a backup for my virtual machine and deploy it like a virtual machine in Azure. Also, this is an offline migration. I can use the data migration assistant tool, and this is an offline migration. If I cannot tolerate any downtime, I should use other tools. For example, I can use always on availability group in my on-premise environment and create another node or replica that is located in Azure. It's an Azure VM. And once the replicas are synchronized, I can perform a failover so that the primary will be in Azure and the secondary will be the on-prem. After that, I will break this always on availability group. This is an online migration. Also, I can configure SQL Server transactional replication, and the subscription will be Azure VM. This is when we discussed about the Azure VM. Now, let's discuss about the Azure SQL database. When should I migrate my database to Azure SQL database? We need, for example, to understand the PaaS service in Azure itself. We know that PaaS services are very nice because we are not responsible for the infrastructure, the machine, the hardware. Also, it provides us with everything automated. We have automatic backup process. We have retention period for 10 years. The restore for point in time, it's very easy. I can build high availability and disaster recovery solution with minimal configurations because it's in the portal. I don't want to build a node and create all these things. I can have a readable replica. I can scale up and down mainly based on the workload requirements. For example, I can put multiple databases in the same pool of resources. We can have transparent data encryption to encrypt the data at rest. I can have dynamic data masking, row level security, always encrypted. All these security features are available in Azure SQL database. So if I need to plan migrating my database to Azure SQL database, I should use the tools that we already discussed to perform the assessment and fix all the blockers, because we have many features and many statements, T-SQL statements. All these will not be compatible with Azure SQL database. I need to make sure that I can fix these problems, and I need to find replacement for my features that are not available in Azure. For example, SQL Server Azure job, we say that we can use Azure Automation, or we can use Elastic Database Job as a replacement. We don't have Windows Authentication in Azure, so we need to replace it with Azure Active Directory Authentication. So after considering all the changes I need to perform, I need to use the migration assessment tools. For example, I cannot take a backup from on-premise and restore it in Azure SQL DB. This is not compatible. I can create something we call it Backpack. It's a deployment package that I can deploy it in Azure, or I can use the data migration assistant tool. I can use, for example, SQL Server transaction application, one-way SQL Server transaction application between on-premise and Azure. Once everything is synced, I can break this operation or this replication. Okay. Also, I need to understand if I should go to Azure SQL or managed instance instead of the Azure SQL DB. So the nice thing with Azure SQL Managed Instance is that it supports all the PaaS services or PaaS features that are available in Azure SQL DB, such as automatic backup, automatic tuning, high availability. At the same time, it supports most of the features that are available in our on-premises, such as the ones that we discussed about cross-database queries, CLR support, SQL agent. If I need to perform migration, I need to use the assessment tool to see if I can perform the migration. I need to understand the cost side of Azure SQL Managed Instance, because it's a little bit more expensive than the Azure SQL database. And I need to understand also the security requirements for the Azure Managed Instance, because mainly it will be isolated in a VNet, which makes more secure. Okay, if I plan to migrate to Azure SQL Managed Instance, I can perform lift and shift operation, because here The nice thing with the Azure SQL Managed Instance is that I can take a backup of my database from on-premise and save the backup or the back file in Azure storage account, global storage account, and I can restore it from there. So it should be an easy migration process. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to me. I think yeah, it's time for questions.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? I have two questions already, or should I say three? But I will want to maybe give other people chance first. Let them, bring their questions out up. Any questions from anyone? Okay, maybe I'll ask one of them. So
Yes.
for companies who also now integrate the I liked when you also mentioned, Azure Synapse Analytics, and also
Mm,
there's this big push now to do, like right now Microsoft has released this new phenomenon, one lake, and there is always all these lake house solutions. And
mm,
how do one consider all these different options within a lakehouse setup? Will it be that within Microsoft Azure, one particular implementation works better than the other? Will it be that, if we are trying to take advantage of one lake and take advantage of Azure Synapse Analytics and all of that, then maybe one cannot use the that would be the infrastructure. One cannot use the IaaS, or is it better to use closer to the one where Microsoft is managing more of the processes? So the question is, what is there differences? Can one begin to uh factor in that if you are going into one lake, you might need to pick one choice over another?
mm. Yeah, it's a good question here. The first thing that I always consider when designing a solution in Azure for any company is the resources that are available in the company. For example, if, for example, this company or company, it's a startup company, and this company is planning to migrate to Azure, or for example, they have a new environment. I will ask them to host both their application and databases in PaaS, platform as a service, because in this way, the cost is less, and they don't have, because they already startup company, they don't have resources to manage the environment, so everything will be managed by Azure. These are managed services. Another thing to consider is that they don't know currently the size of their workload. So maybe they will have large number of customers suddenly. So in this way, they can scale up very quickly. If, for example, they start having customers gradually, so they can perform their scale up or scale down plan gradually based on their requirements without the need to pay a lot. This is when they have a new environment. Another option, if they have a big, or if there is a big company and they are planning to move to Azure, for example, because of they have limitation in their current data center or current resources, hardware resources, they can perform a quick migration to IaaS. In this way, they already have a big team. They can manage and secure and control the virtual machines. At the same time, they don't want to perform a lot of changes to the current environment. They can directly migrate to Azure. No need to perform a lot of changes to the current environment, the data environment and the application environment. Okay, if it's a new establishment or a new choices for you, we need to understand what are the benefits of each one. For example, I need an ETL tool. I will ask you, why you need this ETL tool? You will tell me, okay, I need to migrate data from A to B, or I need to read from CSV files and load it in my database. In this way, I will go and tell you, okay, go and use Azure Data Factory only as an ETL tool. But if you tell me, I need to have a data warehouse solution, I need this solution to be comprehensive so that I need to perform analysis to my data. I need to create a Power BI dashboard. Also, I need a tool that copy the data to my data warehouse from different data sources. In this way, instead of telling you, okay, use Azure Data Factory, go and use Azure SQL Database, and go and use the Azure Databricks. Instead of all this, I will go and tell you, use Azure Synapse Analytics because it's a comprehensive solution that can provide you with all these capabilities together. This is how mainly I can tell you, go and use this or use this. What are your requirements mainly, and how can you perform this or you can achieve these goals with the minimal changes on cost.
Wow. Thank you very much. That's really helped me to, because where I work to, I noticed that all some of the answers you gave, I noticed it, in one department, they take the approach of using Azure Synapse Analytics, and another department, because maybe they already have so large, already entrenched systems, they decide to do the IAS. So now it makes a lot of sense why they are doing different approaches, even though it's within the same company. Okay,
Exactly.
any questions from anyone before? If you want to speak, just raise your hand. I can give you a speaker right. So, okay. And then, so Ahmad, there are two questions we usually ask all
Yeah.
our special guests. So I think I need to read them to you now. Question number
Mm.
one is, this is an interesting field you are in, and you are also with the largest, I think Microsoft is probably the largest, provider in that space. That's what I think anyway.
Mm.
Can you tell us your journey, how you started? How was it that you were able to navigate the whole career and options and platforms and paths, how you did your career path such that you're able to get here, you know. So we would like to
Nice.
hear an interesting story.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yes. Okay. Let me try to introduce my career path mainly in a small story. Okay. So, I have been working at Microsoft for almost about 5 years out of my 13 years of experience. During my career journey, I was trying to be the best version of myself. Why? Because I have to be a successful version that makes me comfortable with any achievement and leaves an impact in any business that I'm working on it. My career journey, usually I divided it into three overlapping phases. I tried to have a success story and impact in each one of it. I try to keep my options always open. Why? Because I need to mainly to achieve my goals, the first thing, and I need to write a success story. Every one of us know that every day it's 24 hours for everyone. But the most important thing is how I can take advantage of this day. So the first phase that I can tell you about, it's the training journey. I call it sometimes physical knowledge sharing phase. I started delivering practical training sessions at the university, which helped my colleagues and students to understand subjects faster. As a result, I was awarded as the best lecturer of the year. And all these things make me to do the next step. This is the nice thing that I mainly like. I continued my training journeys after graduating from the university and delivered hundreds of training sessions to local and global companies and individuals. Currently, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, Microsoft certified educator, and I have more than 20 certificates in the data and AI field. I'm not here to collect a large number of certificates, but the nice thing is that if someone is asking me about any subject and I don't know it, I will not go and tell him that I know, I know. No, if I don't know anything, I will tell you I don't know this thing, but I will go and learn about it. And the best way to learn is prepare for a certificate. And because I have the resources, each one of us have these resources online in Microsoft Learning. I will go, I will learn it, and I will try myself and assess myself by taking this certificate. The second phase of my career journey is the virtual knowledge sharing phase. I started by writing blogs. I have shared more than 450 technical articles with the community in several aspects. What encouraged me here to do more is the kind feedback that I received from the community and how they take advantage of my articles by fixing their issues and learning new things in a very simple way. You know that we are trying to have a simple English language and simple technical language. When I combine both together, we can end up of simple articles that we can use mainly here. I was awarded as the best author of the year in SQL Shack for 2 years also. Also, I published my first book 2 years ago. So I'm trying to jump from one step to another step. I know each one of us can do more than what I'm doing currently, but each one of us should have a motivation, and the motivation will come inside, from inside us. Most of the time, it will not come from outside. So my goal always is to be the best version of myself. I don't want to allow anyone or anything to let me down. No one can draw borders for my growth or success, because just put in your mind that the success road, there is no speed limit. You can go to any speed that you want, and you need to overcome all obstacles and fight to get out of your comfortable zone. You know that each one of us, once you finish your working day, you need to watch TV, you need to do everything, you need to sit with your family. I don't want to come until you don't sit with your family. We have to balance. We have to balance between our working life and our business, or sorry, working life and our personal life. But most of time, when we have extra time, we need to spend it in ourselves, in how to motivate ourselves, how to um, to make difference, especially in the IT or in the data and AI field. The IT field, the data and AI field, we have a lot of people working in this one. But what we should do, we need to make ourselves special in that field. In this way, I think we can have success.
Wow, thank you very, very much. I took a lot of also practical learning too. The way you explain how you always take one phase as a step to another phase. So you started even right from when you were in the university. You never saw uh, whatever you're doing as just the end, but that it will lead to something else. And actually, you are the only person I know that we've invited who works in Microsoft, who is also an MCT. Almost every other person, I think every other person we've invited, they don't have that MCT designation. So it meant you actually, did a lot of interesting things outside of just your Microsoft assigned work. So the last, which is the second question, is what is your advice to people, wanting to make a similar career move, who currently are not in the big data or data engineering space? They have a lot of interest, and they will need some guidance from an experienced person like you on the right way to make the navigation.
Thank you for your question. Mainly the data and the AI field, I cannot say that it's a trend, but it's the best career path for in the IT field currently, because it's a very wide field. You can be a specialist in relational databases as a database administrator. You can be a data engineer to work both in relational and non-relational databases. You can be a data scientist. You can be an AI engineer. Whatever field you prefer, you can be in that field. The most important thing that I need to stress here is that try not to learn everything at the same time. For example, I will not go and tell you, okay, I'm an AI engineer, data scientist, a big data engineer, I'm a data analyst. I know a little about everything. But at the same time, if you know little about everything, you will not reach your goal. Try first to focus in one thing. If you become a specialist in one field, you can start learning other things. For example, I will go and focus on the data engineering. I will become a specialist as a specialist data engineer. Once I learn about this field theoretically and practically, I highly advise you to go and learn little bit about other fields. For example, as a data engineer, it will be very nice if you learn a little bit about Power BI to know how data analysts can work. It's very nice to know a little bit about AI. You have a lot of free resources from Microsoft about AI. You can go and know a little bit about the Databricks, Azure Databricks, and how to use the Spark analysis. No need to be a specialist in everything, because in this way you will find yourself lost. This data and AI field is a very large field. So try to focus in one thing, try to make yourself specialist in that field, and don't stop at that point. Try to learn a little bit about other fields, because maybe sometime you will find yourself, okay, I'm a data engineer and I'm a specialist in that field. When you start learning about AI, okay, I find myself better in AI. So you will jump to another field, but in this way you save your back because you're already specialist in another field. So this is how I try to advise anyone in the IT field. Don't uh, make yourself lost in many fields. Try to focus in one field. Take advantage of all the resources that are available in the internet. You have free resources. If you like videos, you can find a lot of free videos available. You can find also, if you like reading, you'll find a lot of resources from where you can learn.
Wow. Thank you very, very much. I hope someday, when you are chanced again, we will have you come present again. But last chance to people in the audience. Anyone wants to ask him a question before we wrap up today's session? Okay. Okay, so if maybe I've asked all the questions on behalf of everyone, but Ahmad, thank you very, very much for this wonderful session and for the very relatable way you've explained everything. Today, now I understand very well all the different implementations within Azure for data SQL, and also especially the very frank way you give us your own journey and advice. I'm sure that people too, they've taken one or two practical learning from those two. I'm going to be wrapping up the session now. The video will be live tomorrow. My colleague who edits it will do his work, and by tomorrow afternoon he will have posted them. And I also want to say a big thank you to everyone, and a special thank you to Ahmad. I hope we can reach you again and ask you to come
For
in
sure,
the
for
future.
sure, it will be my pleasure for sure. And anyone, I'm very pleasure to be part of this session. And if anyone needs any help in anything, I will be more than happy to help you. You already have my LinkedIn profile here, so feel free to contact me and ask anything that I can provide help with it. Thank you everyone for this chance. Thank you,
Thank
and wish you
you.
a great
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. And happy Sunday, happy New Week to everyone. Have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you. Bye to everyone.